Good morning, Timothy. We are live now.
Okay, well, I just finished pouring you a cup of coffee, so.
You ready for the morning dance?
Oh, I am so ready.
Great. Here we go then. Uh-oh. That's too strong. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the dance this morning once again. I can see that you're reporting from Katsuyama today.
Yes, I'm reporting from inside the cabin of the good ship Santana because the typhoon is kind of coming a little bit early. I think it might stop raining, only to start again, but I'm filming from inside the cabin because it's raining outside. And if it stops, then maybe I can create a little bit more light here without getting rained on.
Okay, I hope so, but still the light is not that bad. It could be better, of course, but it could be worse. So please don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
That's nice.
Now I have other things to worry about.
Right, indeed. So, what's going on in Japanese politics this week?
A lot's going on. You know, the UN is having a General Assembly this week. The Prime Minister is leaving tomorrow with the Foreign Minister. There's a lot going on there. The Emperor and the Empress have left for the funeral services in England. And then the build up to the Abe funeral is generating a lot of flotsam. So there's lots to talk about. Lots going on. I mean, it's only been 1 week since we last got together, but still, even without the Diet in session, it's always active.
Indeed. Well, so shall we start? Before you say it, I'll jump and say that this is the 85th session. We have been going for 85 weeks now, and thank you for your consistency. And once again, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have prepared for this
85 weeks without you allowing there to be a single break.
Right, indeed.
And so I end up here on the good ship Santana, broadcasting almost every weekend because this is what we do.
Indeed. And what you do is very much appreciated. So let's start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And good morning, everybody that's on LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Clubhouse. We really appreciate you tuning in. Excuse me. So it's raining outside. A typhoon is approaching. This is typhoon season. So sometimes it's good sailing. Sometimes it's not so good sailing. Usually after the typhoon passes, the skies are really clear. The wind comes up and it's really lovely. It's good surfing before the typhoon and immediately afterwards. So I hope next week, another 3-day weekend, because we're entering into Silver Week. This is our first 3-day weekend. Next week is a 3-day work week. And then we start with Friday, Saturday, and Sunday as another 3-day weekend for September. That's a big bonus for us. In the meantime, the Prime Minister is not doing so great. His popularity, the polls that are taken every month continue to show a pretty serious decline. GG Press put it at 31% approval rating for the current Prime Minister. This is really worrying. He just shuffled the cabinet. Typically for a Japanese Prime Minister, that means his approval rating goes up. The more conservative estimates of his approval are around 41%. But more worryingly is the disapproval rating is beginning to shoot up. So from the last time that the poll was taken, it went from 39% disapproval to 47% disapproval now. And that's in light of it used to be a 47% approval of the Prime Minister and his cabinet when the poll was taken last month, and that's now resting at 41%. It continues to decline. And it declines because you might remember in our last briefing that the Secretary General of the LDP kind of put out a call to arms for all of the people within the LDP. And he said, look, by Wednesday, I want to receive a 1-page briefing from all of you about your personal ties with the Unification Church. And I want you to be rather specific and descriptive, but put it all on one page. Those submissions were collected, and it turned out that about half of the LDP were in some way affiliated with the Unification Church. Some of that involvement was just as much as, sending congratulatory messages during their, their birthdays, or when they were established, or the death of the founder, Mr. Moon, of the Unification Church in 1954. But with others, it really was much more significant. And unfortunately for the Prime Minister, it was significant for several members of his cabinet. So when he shuffled the cabinet, he said, with the Unification Church and the assassination of my good friend, Mr. Abe, just a couple of days ago, I'm going to recreate the cabinet of people who have no ties with the Unification Church. And that turned out to be pretty bad. It wasn't really accurate. And so he was called to task on that. So initially it was, give me the papers, give me the description, and the LDP reported that. And then the opposition party, led by the Constitutional Democratic Party, really pushed hard for Mr. Kishida to come to the Diet and explain himself. They wanted an explanation of why in the hell is the state paying for the funeral of Mr. Abe? And number two, can you better explain what's going on with the Unification Church and why for 40 years the LDP has had this relationship, this deep relationship? And based on the information that we have from the Secretary General, Mr. Motegi, of the LDP, because that was basically made public, it really didn't quell the fires. It really made things a little bit more excited. And the Prime Minister did go in front of the Diet last week. He attempted to explain himself, and it really didn't go so well for him. He's still getting a lot of criticism. At the same time, more than 1,000 people showed up protesting outside the Prime Minister's residence last week on the state support of the funeral for Mr. Abe. So this is kind of tumbling into a pretty big deal. The reasons for the Prime Minister's falling support is those two issues. Support of the state-sponsored funeral for Mr. Abe and the Unification Church ties, and the lack of the Prime Minister being more descriptive of why and how and who and what they're doing to extract themselves from that. So he's actually had to spend a lot of political capital on that. With regard to the state funeral, it is a state funeral. It will go according to plan, maybe 80 billion yen for security, another 60 for handling the diplomats who are going to be coming into town. And then just the regular cost, which was initially explained by Mr. Kishida. This is the cost for sponsoring the state funeral, and it didn't include those other two components. So the cost for the state funeral, that no matter what, the state has to pay for. It's kind of, if it's not a state-sponsored funeral, there are too many people that are coming in. The state needs to handle that, and it's not something that the LDP can handle. So there's a lot of criticism, and Mr. Nikai went on television just the other day, and he kind of was interpreted as very flippant, but I think he was pretty accurate, that the state funeral is going to go forward, whether the people like it or not. It was decided by the cabinet. It is within the preview of the cabinet, and we've done things like this in the past. It's rather unusual, but he was assassinated in the line of duty. He was the longest serving prime minister. There were some scandals there, but we're going to go through with it anyway, kind of, flipping his nose at the general population. And it's also could be said that the agitation of the people who are taking the polls and submitting their answers, because usually when they take polls, I mean, sometimes it's based on, maybe 400 people that are, putting a sticker like, dislike, or something like that, something that's just done on the street. And so passions can be manipulated a little bit. But I think when all is said and done, people will acknowledge that Mr. Abe was a significant person in Japanese history and contemporary Japanese politics and economy. 11 years as prime minister. That's a pretty big deal. At the same time, the Unification Church was, in cahoots with his grandfather. This is a long time ago. And it turned out that the Unification Church and the LDP are united on certain policy fronts against the expansion of communism, for example, the unity of the nuclear family, against LGBT. They were unified in a lot of different areas. And that started a long time ago. Like Komeito, which is the political arm of Soka Gakkai, the Unification Church had its own kind of political arm. And this political arm was really active in generating this facilitation with the LDP. And it seems like they did a really good job working hard on it for, 40 years. A lot of investigation has gone into how they generate that. And it's rather easy if you belong to a club or an association or a sporting group or a barbers association, all of which have associations that do vote en bloc for certain candidates. If you can do that, the LDP or the politicians will love you because you bring a certain amount of stability to their election process. And the Unification Church did this in spades, also providing political funds, which they are capable of doing, to various political candidates. And it has been successful for the LDP and something of a reliance. Now, with them being labeled as kind of a state-sponsored enemy, because the administration has put out a call. If you have been violated or damaged by anything that your family has done or that the Unification Church has done for you, for example, you bought a piece of pottery and you spent a million yen for it, and now you feel remorse about that, we will help you. So that is beginning to build, and so the Unification Church is becoming something of a, I don't know, what would you say? Something of a scapegoat, for example. But they're, for 54 years it's been going on. It was very famous for having mass weddings. You might remember that in the 70s. And the children of those mass weddings are in the second generation of the Unification Church. So it's deep and it's very strong. Like in all religions, sometimes the second generation becomes disenfranchised, but there still is a very strong core. They still provide votes and stability to many LDP candidates. And now that this is all out in the open, it is likely that the next time there is an election, Komeito, who supports many LDP candidates as their coalition partner, will pull their support out of these candidates who have now been revealed as, supporting the Unification Church or getting support from the Unification Church. So they don't like that. So they're going to be pulling out. The estimates say that there are 29 LDP candidates that rely on the Unification Church support and rely on Komeito to support them. So having that pulled out, obviously the Unification Church may or may not provide support for them, but in light of everyone scattering and diminishing themselves from any affiliation with the Unification Church, and Komeito saying, look, you've been supporting our arch enemy, we're not going to support you in the next election. It's going to be really rock and roll in the next election. We don't know when that will be, but it's not looking very good for the prime minister. He is busy. He's doing things. He's trying to generate this coalition with South Korea, with India, with even Iran. So I don't know. At home, the economy is not doing so well, and so he's got a lot of things to occupy himself. Like I said, he and his foreign minister are leaving tomorrow for New York. There is a big enclave of the UN security, the UN assembly. They'll be there for a couple of days, and there are a couple of side summits that are being arranged. One of them is between Japan and South Korea. This is a big deal. This is the first time for the prime minister to meet newly elected Yoon, the the president of South Korea. And so this is, highly anticipated. it's a pretty big deal. There are a lot of issues to talk about and to resolve there. And people are hopeful. At the same time, the prime minister is also meeting with the president of Iran. This is something quite unusual. Iran is capable of visiting and being in New York, although a lot of people in the Biden administration don't like that because of all of the tension that's going on there and their violation of what was considered to be a nuclear pact, a nuclear deal, a multilateral pact that was canceled by President Trump in 2018, I believe. So there's a lot of consternation there, and Japan is trying, particularly the prime minister is trying to be one of these peacemakers, one of these deal makers in geopolitics. He's going to the UN Assembly, first of all, to represent Japan, but also to talk about nuclear nonproliferation. The G7 will be held in the spring of this next year in Hiroshima, his election district. And one of the issues he wants to promote is, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed. They were the only cities that were bombed by nuclear weapons. And he wants to promote that and, kind of be the vanguard of nuclear nonproliferation. At the same time, Mr. Hamada, the defense minister, met with Lloyd Austin just this last week. And they were talking about a lot of things that, you talk about nuclear nonproliferation on one side of your mouth, and then on the other side of the mouth, you're talking about first strike capabilities or counter strike capabilities, which are not really allowed, not really contemplated in the Japanese constitution. It looks like that is going to be, I guess, scrapped under the conversations that are being held now, with the defense budget being increased by 100% from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP. There's a lot going on into that. And one of the discussions that they had, you might remember that China flew a supersonic missile around the world. Nobody knew about it until it was actually launched and flying. It went around the world. It was the first time in history for this to happen. And it just shocked the intelligence community to their core because of that capability. So the United States and Japan are coming together to try and enhance those capabilities too. But not only that, also the counter-strike and first strike capabilities. And what they talked about is acquiring those kind of capabilities. So that means, number one, that Japan doesn't have that. That would be kind of dual use capabilities, which they don't possess now. It means acquiring them. So yeah, you better increase your defense budget, because acquiring that means that's a complete system for allowing that. In the past, since Japan enjoyed the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States, mostly featured on Okinawa, 70% of the U.S. forces presence is in Okinawa, and the U.S. Stance on providing protection for Japan regionally is basically based there. So to have a new system kind of indoctrinated into the defense forces is a really big and expensive deal. And some would say it's a violation of the Constitution. I think when we talk about the Constitution, the revision of the Constitution, it comes up on this channel almost weekly. I think the Japanese, when it comes time for Japan to act, I think the United States just doesn't have the patience for it to go through the process of the referendum. I think they're just going to be acting quietly, in spite of the constitutional prohibitions against these kinds of defense expenditures and these capabilities, because there are just too many fingers that are pointing in that direction that it's going there. The Japanese Defense Ministry has also promoted that the Coast Guard will also fall within the parameters of the defense budget. So they're going to be getting a little bit more boost in spending and in capabilities. They've also talked about having the islands that are near Taiwan, those administered basically by Okinawa, receive kind of retrofitting and bolstering in the event that there is an exodus in Taiwan because of aggressive actions by China. So you can see that, people don't do this without some really remarkable evidence that tells them you need to be prepared for this. So this is beginning to increase. You can see it, you can follow it. That's why I posted on LinkedIn in anticipation of this show today, that you can feel something in the air. Something is building. It's not just what's going on in the United States with Biden and Trump and the inflation and the dollar inflation going on there. But it's also here in Japan, what's going on with the defense budget, what's going on with Mr. Kishida, what's going on with Okinawa, what's going on with South Korea. So all of these issues are critically important, and they're all intertwined. So we try and keep an eye on that. For those of you who are just on the briefing, we have a question and answer on a lot of the issues that I don't cover or I just touch upon. We go into the Q&A. It's about twice as long as the regular briefing. So please tune into that if you've got any questions or issues. The Prime Minister has also acquiesced that after the September 27th, that'll be next week's funeral for Mr. Abe, then we move into October. He will have a diet session from October 3rd. So a lot of forces are going in that direction. I don't know if it's going to enhance his numbers. What happens in New York will be really significant, and you can anticipate that his numbers will come up because it's an easy way for him to generate admiration and respectability and a presence, global presence, by being in the UN and by meeting with the leaders of, he'll meet with Biden, he'll meet with the president of South Korea, he'll meet with Iran. There's just an awful lot going on there. So this is anticipated to build up his presence, his portfolio. And then we move into the state funeral. That also bolsters the Prime Minister because of all of the leaders that are coming here. It is a huge deal. It'll be at the Budokan, and everybody and their brother will be here. It doesn't look like Barack Obama will come. Earlier reports were that Kamala Harris will be coming. The reports now are that she is still coming, but that Barack Obama will not come. But Bill Hagerty, former ambassador to Japan from the United States, will be coming. This is significant because when you want to look at people who are going to be significant in the near term, there are certain signature moves that you can follow. And I think with Bill Hagerty, you can see that he's moving up. He left the ambassador post here in Tokyo to run for a Senate seat in Tennessee. He won that seat. And it looks like, he's really positioning himself. Him coming to Japan, it's not as a representative of Barack Obama because he was appointed by President Trump as ambassador. But it does signify that his role within the Senate, within U.S. politics, is rising. So I think it's a good sign. He knows Japan. He was here for not quite 2 years. He left rather abruptly, unfortunately. I think he was an effective and significant ambassador, even for his very brief period of time. But he will be coming, and so you can expect, some news coming out of that. And that's, today is what, the 18th? It's 9 days away. Another thing that happened this last week, Maya, is a chip alliance. They call it Chip 4. It's a combination of South Korea, Japan, the United States, and India coming together for protecting and supporting production of chips. So TSMC is based in Taiwan. Everybody knows that. It makes 90% of the high effective, the most secretive, the most complicated chips. TSMC in Taiwan produces that. Between these four countries, they produce 70% of the world production of chips. So it's very important. They've pulled that together. Let me see, who was it? It was Taiwan was not initially a part of the alliance, the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership, but it's being pulled in now as a component of this chip alliance. So I think people who are putting together the economic partnership for the Indo-Pacific didn't want to upset China too much. And it looks like they've given that up and said, we're going to piss them off no matter what we do. So let's go ahead and begin to make these inroads with Taiwan. And you'll notice in many of the reports now that they're identifying certain individuals as the de facto ambassador from Taiwan to the United States. That came up this last week in one of the meetings. And then in another meeting, the de facto ambassador from Taiwan will attend on behalf of the president of Taiwan, the Abe state funeral. So you're seeing these noises, these signals coming up pretty frequently. And so it looks like this line is being more clearly drawn. There was a big conclave this last week where the prime minister made a video speech, and also the president of China also made a speech, and he kind of wagged his finger at Japan. He said, do not make unclear what your stance is with regard to Taiwan. There's a one China policy. You said that, and you made that statement, and now you're being a little bit funny with the words. Don't do that. I'm watching. And it is becoming a little bit more of an inescapable problem. So getting back to one of the other problems that the prime minister is having, the state funeral, it will happen the way it has been portrayed. The Constitutional Democratic Party has said that at least for their leadership, the 11 people who are in the leadership of that opposition party, they won't attend the state funeral. It doesn't mean that everybody in the opposition party, and some of the opposition parties are not opposed to the state funeral. They will participate. They will send representatives of that. But as far as the Constitutional Democratic Party is concerned, it's a no-go. They want an explanation that is sufficient to describe why this is a state funeral. They want more clarity on the cutting of ties with the LDP with the Unification Church. And they want to know the answer to this question that everybody's asking. You know, you've had this, everybody's provides this piece of paper to the Secretary General of the LDP. They describe their relationship with the Unification Church and what they're doing to diminish that. But nobody has talked about Mr. Abe and what his personal issues were, what his relationship was. And that's a big deal because that's kind of like the base of the iceberg. It's underwater. It's kept underwater. Nobody's touching it. Nobody's talking about it. But probably he is the one that was motoring that relationship because it was his grandfather that, you know, initially started that relationship with the Unification Church so many years ago. And from there, it just ballooned so that it just quietly got into many of the LDP and also, you know, members of the opposition party as well. So I think with Mr. Kishida, he's distancing himself from it, but the role of Mr. Abe is just being totally ignored. And the Constitutional Democratic Party wants an answer. They want an explanation. So I think not getting that is going to keep the downward pressure on Mr. Kishida. Senkaku Islands, you might remember, you might not. The Senkakus were private property maybe 20 years ago. They belonged to an individual. And during the administration of Shintaro, what's his name? The governor of Tokyo. Tokyo purchased from this individual the Senkaku Islands, and an anniversary of that was just this last week. So they became private property, and then they became property of Tokyo, and then Tokyo relinquished them as state property the same year that Tokyo purchased them. So China has been laying claims to them for about 15 years after it was disclosed that oil, gas, and rare minerals are distributed throughout that area that's geopolitically determined by that piece of land. Now that land is administered by Okinawa Prefecture, but the United States and Japan are very hot on protecting those. There's been so many incursions over the last year and a half that the Coast Guard is frequently called out. The islands, of course, are unmanned. There's nobody living on them, but they kind of set the boundary. They're about 170 kilometers from Taiwan, so they're the closest to Taiwan, and they're that kind of boundary spot. So they're geopolitically and militarily very important for Japan, for the United States. I think what you're going to see is a lot more action on that. If something happens in Taiwan, definitely something that's going to happen in Senkakus, and that's why they're building up the bases in Okinawa. They're retrofitting. They're trying to make the SDF and the Coast Guard more military capable. So all of these indicators point to something happening, somewhere in the near term is my interpretation of it. It's not a very nice feeling. Let me see. Okinawa, you remember there was a governor's race just this last week. Denny Tamaki, the former governor of Okinawa, won by a pretty good margin. He had 51% of the vote. His second contender, or his first contender, received about 41% of the vote. And then there were two other contenders. They received just minor amounts. But Denny Tamaki is governor for the next 4 years. And this really upsets the LDP and the central government of Mr. Kishida, because they need to move the Marine base from Futenma to Henoko. And Denny Tamaki initially ran very strong on the position that he's not going to allow that. The Marine base stays in Futenma and it should leave Okinawa. 70%, we are hosting 70% of the US bases. We don't want that anymore. If you're going to move the Marine base from Futenma, don't move it to someplace else in Okinawa. Move it to Guam or move it to someplace else. Okinawa is only 0.6% of the landmass of Japan, and we're hosting 70% of the defense capabilities. Give me a break. And if you're going to do that, then why don't you send us more money? So his opposition candidate, a fellow by the name of Sakima, ran against him 4 years ago and lost. He is supported by the LDP, and he was actually promising voters, I will provide daycare, free daycare for you, school lunches for all of the kids. You'll get that for free. Just enticing them with money that would be coming in from the LDP in the event that the LDP was able to have a candidate there as governor. They lost out on that. At the same time, though, Ginowan is the city that is the administrative municipality for Futenma. And the mayor of that was the LDP candidate. And he won pretty soundly. He won maybe 2/3 of the vote. So his campaign was also based on moving Futenma from there to Henoko and being cozy with the LDP and distributing, the benefits of that to the population within his district. He looks like he might be a candidate for governor the next time around, but right now you can expect there's going to be a little bit more fireworks. The prime minister is visibly angry about the governor winning his race and about him actually going on and saying, look, the base issue was initially the hot issue, but it became more about the economy and tourism and getting our back on our feet for the economy here. And that was the shift that occurred maybe last week in the election in the closing days. And it seemed to take the governor to his victory. So be on the watch out for what's going on in Okinawa. I think within the next 3 months, you're going to see some significant controversies going on there. Almost finally, tourism. So tourism is a huge engine of growth for the Japanese economy. The administration has to do something. The prime minister had a conclave last week talking about new capitalism, about boosting economic growth, about raising wages. A lot of this is stuff he's already talked about in the past, but I think now he's putting beef on the bones and things will happen. He's actually announced that he's going to be sending gomayen, about $380, to all of the impoverished families throughout Japan to help them pay for electricity and food bills. It's just a little bit of a drop in the bucket for these people, and it is really it's not addressing the core issue of why Japan is suffering so much and why the yen is so low compared to many of the other major currencies. That weakness of the yen, it pushed to 144, almost 155, 45 to the dollar this last week. The Bank of Japan leapt in. They began to send signals without actually doing anything policy-wise, and then it cooled it down a little bit. But I think the yen is going to go farther into deep territory. You can anticipate that. I think even analysts are saying now, before the end of the year, it will go to 148. That's the trigger point. 146 actually was the trigger point for intervention about 5 years ago. So I think you can anticipate something like that going on. It is good for tourism. And so the Prime Minister has said, let's ginny up tourism. So this very temporary stay, where he said the number of foreign visitors to Japan, we had a cap on that. It was 20,000. We're now going to increase it to 50,000. That only lasted for about 3 weeks. So it's no longer 50,000. Starting next week, the gloves come off, and it's going to be an open border, kind of reverting back to the olden times when just the number of visas allocated to each country. And also significantly, visitors from the United States and a couple of other countries, I think England also qualifies, they don't need to have visas, as before COVID that was the case. If you want to come visit Japan, you're going to be here for 90 days, I believe is the limitation, might be 60 days. You can come in without a visa. So I know there are a lot of people that are anticipating that. You don't have to be tied to a tour group. You don't have to report on your whereabouts. You just have to come in with proof of 3 vaccinations. So you're going to see a lot of that happening now that the gloves have come off. As we move into October, the Prime Minister is really going to be pushing that new capitalism, enhanced wages for employees. It's a little bit of a stretch, but he's really doubling down because he understands how much trouble he's in because of the economy, because of the inflation, because of the low yen value, and because wages are just stubbornly staying where they are. And even when they are increased, it's very small, and it doesn't cover the amount of money people have lost for because of inflation. That's basically it. I've gone on a little bit long. I apologize, Maya, but we can go into the Q&A and talk about some of the issues that I might have missed, and maybe elaborate and correct some of those where I'm not as accurate as some of the people would like, and maybe they have other, intel to talk about that.
Yes, definitely. So thank you very much for the briefing, and let's go immediately to Clubhouse without any further delay here. There are quite a few comments and questions in our LinkedIn thread. So yes, I know you're scared and probably terrified. Please don't
But
run
it
away.
stopped raining. It stopped raining. So this.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I'll join you on Clubhouse, and for everybody else that's on LinkedIn, thank you for tuning in, and please stay tuned for next week. It'll be active.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, and I'll see you on the other side.
Okay, see you.
See you.